in Fredericton right now? Well, the state of the environment and potential threats to it are always in the backdrop of any political campaign in New Brunswick. Simply put, most people care about what happens to the air they breathe and their rivers and lakes and the forests. And that's especially true during the times we live in, with the record flooding this spring and noticeable extremes in the weather. Joining me this morning to talk about where the environment fits into this election campaign are three very influential voices on the issue. Lois Corbett is Executive Director of the Conservation Council of New Brunswick. She is on the phone with us this morning. Marieka Chaplin is Executive Director of the Nashwaak Watershed Association. And Roberta Clowater heads the New Brunswick Chapter of CPAWS. That's an acronym for the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. Good morning to you all. Thank you for coming in.
Good morning, Terry. Good morning.
Okay, Lois, I'm going to start with you. This is a broad question, what is the current state of the environment in New Brunswick?
It's not in really bad shape, but we don't have government leadership so that it makes it a top-of-mind issue. You'll find out there amongst the members of the general public a high level of concern about water quality, about the state of our forests, particularly our crown forests, about spraying in the crown forest. So there's a general level of angst, and there's nothing quite like a provincial election to focus that concern and then to ask the people who are standing on our stoop, asking for our support, exactly what it is they intend to do about it. We want, I think, as citizens, we want them to act, and in the last 2 weeks going into a campaign, we definitely want them to articulate their priorities for action, and I think this is an important time to help us focus.
Okay, Marieka Chaplin, what's your assessment of the current state of the environment in New Brunswick?
Well, there's certainly always room for improvement, and an election period is a great time for people to have their voices heard, and certainly we would like to reinforce the concept that voting is a time to think about nature. It's a time to think about conservation. It's a real opportunity. For ourselves as a watershed organization, we are very concerned about freshwater protection, obviously. We've heard about many news stories recently. Some people may have slightly forgotten the blue-green algae issue here in Fredericton. There are water quality concerns at provincial parks. The list goes on. We'd like to see this election, freshwater protection, getting a bit more time, a bit more resources dedicated to it. We have lots of intelligent people working in our provincial government. We need more resources to go to empower them to work on freshwater protection. As a watershed group, we do a lot of testing ourselves for water quality. We test for temperature. We look at E. coli levels. Watershed groups across our province are doing that work, but there doesn't seem to be a particularly effective mechanism yet for getting that information out to the people. We have a really good tool, a water strategy created by our provincial government just this year. We have an opportunity with the minister giving power to staff to put some real work on the ground into that. For example, initially we need a deliverable, a strong deliverable. People in the province want to know about the status of our rivers, of our lakes, of our streams. We need an initial report that will provide that detail to know what our status is, and I see that being as a key deliverable as the strategy gets implemented. So the strategy is only so good as its implementation, and that's the next step that we need to take that to. And I would like to see voters asking their candidates how they're going to move the implementation of the strategy forward. With climate change, we're going to see more water quality issues. We're seeing warmer water in our river annually. That's creating a lot of ripple down effects.
Roberta Clowater, your assessment of the state of the environment in New Brunswick?
I think that the thing that most concerns me, and that should concern most people in New Brunswick, is that we aren't doing enough to protect nature. We're not doing enough to make sure that there are areas that are protected from industrial development and from development period in the province, and therefore that insurance policy that we need to protect us from in a time of climate change, that we need to protect the nature that we care about, that we need to protect the river systems that protect us from flooding, are just not there. We aren't making sure that that basic building block for the health of nature, our own environment, the habitat that supports us all, is being protected. We have an opportunity right now. The federal government is leading a discussion across the country. All the provincial governments have signed on to work on protected areas, get more protected areas by 2020 to achieve a national target of 17%. And the New Brunswick government, we're still waiting for action on the New Brunswick government's part. There's they have committed to their colleagues that they will participate, but it hasn't yet made its way into action on the ground or decisions to have new protected areas and be up there and be protecting nature at the same level that other provinces are doing. So that's the concern that we have, and we know that it's going to take political will to do that. It's not that we don't know what areas need to be protected. It's not that we don't have the biologists. We certainly do have the biologists and ecologists, and everybody knows what we need to do to make this happen. It's that we need political will to make the decision and say, look, part of our province, 15% of our province, 20% of our province needs to be in protected areas where nature is the main driver. And political will means people need to take action during elections and say to people, whenever there's a candidate at your door, whenever you're at a political panel in the public, a community meeting, ask those questions about nature. Let people know that that's one of your priorities, because otherwise it falls off the table and they get talking about all the other issues.
Why does it fall off the table? Why isn't the political will there?
I would say there is a lot of pressure against having protected areas. Pressure from large industries in the province that currently operate mainly on Crown land, that are not very interested in seeing more protected areas. We shouldn't necessarily be blaming them. They're businesses, they're operating as businesses. It's part of their job to advocate for the kind of business model that they want to see happen. We should be blaming government if they're not standing up for the interests of nature, for but basically saying, we have a bottom line. We have to protect the natural areas of the province, and then we're going to talk about how much forest we cut, where we put mines, all the other decisions. So, and you can do both. In other provinces in Canada, they're doing both. Mm-hmm. They're figuring out ways to do this. It doesn't shut down industry. And I think this is something that we need the politicians here in New Brunswick to be more strong about.
Okay, Lois Corbett, you were about to say something.
Right, I'm just going to jump in and I say that I think sometimes unfairly we've been, as voters and as citizens, we've been put into a box and we've been asked to choose jobs or healthcare or education as our top priorities in elections, when there are any number of issues that are important to us and the values that we hold, like the health and safety of our communities. And that's why when we get into these final days in an election, we have to come out of that box and say, yes, so that other jobs are important to us. We're not happy with long wait times for family doctors or sitting around with our senior citizen parents in emergency rooms. But to get the equation of government leadership right, don't push me into the corner and tell me that I have to choose public health and safety for environmental protection versus jobs in the forest industry. That's an unfair question and absolutely the unfair frame. Make for simpler speeches delivered on the doorstep by candidates of parties at certain stripes, but it is not the whole equation. And we know how much New Brunswickers value clean water, their open spaces, their rivers, their streams, their coastlines. Think of all of that stuff that's been happening over in the Northumberland Strait and Shediac is important, and it's up to us to articulate our concerns and demand from the CAPs who are asking for our support that they support progressive elements going forward.
Okay, Marieka Chaplin, let me ask you, how do you get beyond the construction of the political debate as being either we can protect nature and the environment, or we can create jobs?
That's a good question, Terry. I don't know if I can answer that. I don't think it's quite as black and white as that. As an employee in the environmental sector, that's my passion. That is what I'm working for. That's my job. It's my job to promote conservation. And I do believe there are a lot of spin-offs if we conserve. And I also do believe that if we wait to put ourselves in a situation where we're paying for the costs of remediation, we're paying for the costs of flooding because we have infrastructure in our floodplain, that is a lot more expensive than forward thinking, where we don't have to be, where we're looking after a healthy ecosystem at the outset. The costs of remediation are a lot more expensive. And so just an example, I don't know if listeners are familiar with the Greenway concept, but it's something that we're trying to promote, and it's along the floodplain here. We're calling our Greenway the Nashwaak Greenway, from Marysville to the mouth of the Nashwaak as it reaches the St. John River. And we'd like to see that area protected and restored to a floodplain forest. And there are so many benefits for flood prevention, carbon sequestration, obviously habitat and biodiversity. And, of course, the trees that we're planting, silver maples, can uptake like 220 liters of water an hour.
Let me I just want to stop you there because I'm running out of time, and I just want to, for people who are listening to us have this conversation, who care about environmental protection, I'm going to ask the three of you quickly. You've looked at the party platforms. I'm sure you're familiar with what the parties are saying about the environment. Roberta, what stands out for you in all the platforms that you've looked at in terms of a party that's prepared to provide environmental protection?
I would say that I've noticed that all of the parties are paying more attention to environmental issues this election more than any other provincial election that I can remember. A diversity of environmental topics. So they're talking about how do we manage our crown forests. They're talking about, some of them are talking about protected areas and having actual targets. They're talking about clean water. They're talking about parks and how we manage them. So I think that there are parties out there that are talking about these things, and it's up to voters to educate themselves, and they can certainly go to any of our websites and find information about what's happening in the election, or questions that they could be asking the different candidates. I would say that we just need more focus on certain elements of the environmental agenda, and the only way to get there, the only way to get the party leaders and the parties themselves talking more about it, is for them to be hearing more about it at the doors. There's a little bit of flexibility during the election campaign, and they will actually move and shift their messages a little bit if they're hearing a lot of interesting things at the door about the environment and protecting the environment.
Okay, Lois Corbett, I've got less than 2 minutes left, I'm afraid to say. So would you...
Big differences between the two are for bonds. Three of the parties are, for example, absolutely opposed and committed to banning spraying on crown forest and on clear cuts. That's a big issue, and folks can check that out on their platforms. One party's in favor of regional fracking, and the other parties are in favor of maintaining a moratorium. So there are some differences. Roberta's 100% right that they're talking more about it. Good on us, good on them, that the attention is front and center. But there are some differences there. So if you're standing up for a climate plan and for action, check out the platforms. If you're against spraying, make sure you ask your candidates what exactly they're prepared to do.
Okay. And Marieka, I've got a minute left. Do you get the same sense that there is a heightened interest in the environment?
Yes, I do. And back to the economic development concept that you mentioned there, we firmly recommend that projects that have economic development associated with them be done with a more of a closed loop approach. So, for example, if a project is starting in an environment with a healthy ecosystem, the project does not come to close or completion until the ecosystem is restored to that same starting point.
Okay, I thank the three of you for coming in. I'm sorry I don't have more time, but your time is appreciated. Lois Corbett is Executive Director of the Conservation Council of New Brunswick. Marieka Chaplin is Executive Director of the Nashwaak Watershed Association. And Roberta Clowater is Executive Director of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, New Brunswick Chapter. It's 7:30. It's time for your CBC New Brunswick News.